evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. Looks like everything is working tonight a little better. We've got a good connection and I'm excited about tonight's broadcast. So I trust that everything is working okay. Now, excellent. Everything is where I want it to be. I am excited about that tonight. So, we're going to be looking at the materials surrounding the triumphal entry. I am sorry about the glitches last night, but I hear that I was not the only one. So that doesn't necessarily make everything beautiful, but it means that I was in very good company. And so, without further ado, I'm excited. There we go. I am glad to see Chris joining us on a regular basis. That is really exciting. And I know he's in Vermont, so he's got to be, say 2 hours later. So that's really good. Uh, I was questioning whether Marlene's working tonight just for the sake of the community. She's gotten an evening job. Now that means we see very little of each other right now, but it's some extra money for the household, and it's what she loves doing, sewing. So she will get home, and I will be sound asleep, conked out, and I will see her briefly in the morning while she does some errands and other things. And so we're working through all this. So prayers for the job. It seems to work out pretty good, but you never know in this economy and with this world what's going on. Chris tells me it's 8 o'clock in Vermont. I remember Vermont. What I remember about Vermont is that when it gets dark and cold, it gets dark and cold. So I'm going to switch us over to the PowerPoint. Now I'm going to have to make a quick change here where I put myself back in here and I shrink the PowerPoint down a little bit because I had increased its size just a little bit. And I'm going to shrink me down as if I was on a Zoom meeting here and make that a little bit bigger. Okay. And I can't do that the way I want it to, but there you have it. You can't overlap the way you can in a regular Zoom meeting. So, um, and so that's where we're at tonight, and that's probably the best that I can do. So, um, let's get going on our PowerPoint. Um, we are in Matthew. We're going to end the last pericope of chapter 20. Now, remember, I've talked about pericopes. There's some fun stuff going on. That we're going to be able to cover. By the way, if you get a chance to come to Hillside Sunday School, which I do on Zoom and stream here, I have to tell you, we're going to discuss a literary feature called chiasm and how it affects prophecy in a neat way, talking about the Feast of Tabernacles. So that's just a promo that if you don't have a Sunday school to be at or you're not at your local church, I'd love to have you. And you will learn what a chiasm is and how it helps us understand the main point of passages. So that's my little plug for Sunday if you don't have somewhere else to be. If you have a home church and it meets during the time I broadcast, which is 1:30 Phoenix time, you need to be with the brothers and sisters there. However, it will be posted and you can always learn about a chiasm later on. So that will be just kind of a fun thing that I get to talk about this Sunday. Let's look at the end of chapter 20, which is really the preparation for the chapter that has the triumphal entry in it. And so we are really at the end here. Last time we covered the fact that greatness in the kingdom is connected to serving. And so you should be able to see the text better this evening. And what we're dealing with now are verses 29 through 34. So you can turn your cell phone to 29 through 34, or you can simply look at the slide if it's indeed big enough. And that's a little harder for me to judge because I see it real clearly. You can also let me know how this looks to you. So I'd be happy to hear from you. I'm looking at the chats. Oh, excellent. glad to see Slam RN in there. So that is great. Shalom and welcome. So, this is the last part here. This story bridges the gap between Jesus' discussing of leadership and service in the kingdom and how they're connected, and his parable related to the vineyard and the workers, and the beginning or the telling of the actual triumphal entry. And we're going to talk about some of the dating there because there's some excellent uh, connections here between prophecy and Jesus' entering during this time period. Now, Jesus is again moving out. Now, the Greek word is a little bit tricky here. And with the later in this section, casting out of the money changers, there's a question about this. Most commentators have no problem with the word went out. And it's a form of the Greek word erchomai, but you don't need to know that. But erchomai sounds cool. It was one of those Greek words in seminary I really liked. And so they went out of Jericho. Now, I remember being in Israel and seeing Jericho. Now, there's an ancient site for Jericho, and then there's modern Jericho, and they're closely geographically connected, but they aren't the same site. And so sometimes objections are raised about Jericho and whether the Bible's truthful. And we know that Jericho as a city shifted a little bit. And so they're doing digging around the ancient city of Jericho. And there's an old wadi, which is like a dried up riverbed that isn't dried up all the time. So you want to be careful about walking those wadis because if there's spring rain, it's like Arizona. You get flooding and you could be permanently lost. Like you go with the water. And that's not good. But there's an old road from Jericho up to Jerusalem. And so I remember going to Jerusalem from the Dead Sea when I was in Israel. Now it's got to be about 12 years ago. In fact, someday I will have to renew my passport. Why do you do that? You don't leave the country much. I like to have a valid passport, and I do not know whether God will open opportunities to speak in another country. And the way things are going, some places in this country might begin to feel like another country. I don't know. It's kind of neat to have a passport. By the way, your passport can be used at any airport. And that's kind of nice because we're going to have to get new licenses here. But I digress. Passports were not a part of things back then. The only thing you really need to know is I visited Jericho. And I remember well the elevation difference and traveling up. And as we were driving up, the Wadi Kelt was pointed out to us. And so he went up out of Jericho, and a great multitude followed him. We're going to talk about that multitude later. And behold, two blind men sitting by the road, when they heard that it was that Jesus was passing by, cried out, "Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David." Then the multitude warned them that they should be quiet. But they cried out all the more, saying, "Have mercy on us, O Lord, Son of David." And so Jesus stood still and called them and said, "What do you want me to do for you?" And they said, "Lord, that our eyes may be opened." And so Jesus had compassion and touched their eyes, and immediately they received their sight and followed him. Now that's the last section before we enter the narrative. Is there anything we get out of all of this? Well, we do get a few things out of all of this. First of all, they did the right thing. And in here, I point out that I'm going to go back to my slide here in a minute. I'm going to point out they had the good sense to be seeing when others were blind. So that's just to kind of let you know that the seeing men were the blind men were seeing, and the seeing men were blind. And Matthew's using this sort of paradox. That's what you need to see here. This is contrasted with the eventual response of the people, which starts out good, but ends up not being good. And this is in contrast to the religious leaders who, although they say they can see, they are blind. So And that's where our problem is. The seeing leaders and nation that should have recognized Jesus do not, but the two blind guys who can't see better than everyone else sees. So Matthew's using the power of contrast here. New book in the Logos library, if you tuned in to the review of Logos that Vocab and I did, is called Paradoxes of the Bible, Turning Truth on Its Head. And it's based on this idea that a lot of times God uses the power of paradox. In fact, I remember Michael Card having a song, and the power of paradox open their eyes is one of the lines, and blinds those who say they can see. And so paradox is something used here. And these guys are going to be in paradox to the events that are going to unfold later. So it's not an accident Matthew's put it in here. You got to follow the argument through. You got to follow the flow of the text and see what's happening. And this is exciting. What did they do? They had the proper response. They followed him. Now, Jesus doesn't go right into Jerusalem. Okay? He stops at Bethpage. Translated, it's the house of figs. Kind of interesting because Jericho is the city of palms. Bethphage is the house of figs. We're going to talk a little bit about the location. It's near Jerusalem. And here Jesus sends the two disciples on ahead. Now that's 21 verse 1, and that sets the scene. So he moves out of Jericho, travels up towards Jerusalem, reaches Bethphage, and near the Mount of Olives. You're talking about the topography here. And he sends his disciples on ahead. That's what's going on here. Okay? Now, as I said, the blind see and the seeing are blind. So I did have the text before the point, but the point's been made. Okay? What you need to understand about this is, why does Jesus have to do this big triumphal entry thing? Where we're going to see how it fits in with prophecy. But what you need to understand is that the triumphal entry is the official presentation of the Messianic King to the nation. So how they respond to that and what happens with this is very important. And so this is Jesus's official, the king has come into the city, and so you need to understand that in light of this, because this is that official presentation. Okay? Now, D.A. Carson, who I'm reading a lot of lately, points out that there was the military road. We talked about that from Jericho to Jerusalem. Remember I said it was a climb? That's 3,000 feet climb. Okay? Jesus doesn't go all the way. It goes through Bethany, the house of the poor, and Bethpage, the house of figs. And these are on the slopes of the Mount of Olives. And from the Mount of Olives, and I remember looking down over a cemetery that was on the Mount of Olives, you look down over what's called the Kidron Valley, and then you see going up from the Kidron Valley, Jerusalem. So I want you to get kind of a picture of that. Okay. The mount itself stands about 3,300 feet higher than the Temple Hill, which is about 100 feet higher than the Hill of Zion. And what it does is it allows a beautiful view of the city. Now, I didn't show you the background that I normally show you. So I'm going to go back, I think. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put the background of Jerusalem here, because the picture of the background of Jerusalem is exactly what we're talking about here. So I'm going to take my capture device off for a second. And what I want you to see is what you're doing when you look down there is you're at the Mount of Olives and you're looking down. Now this picture doesn't do it complete justice here. I'm going to try to move the picture up a little bit here. There you go. And move the picture up and you're seeing the wall, but that's looking down from the Mount of Olives to give you a picture. So if you're looking down from the Mount of Olives, you could see the valley, but the valley's cut off, and then you see the entrance into Jerusalem, and then you see that mosque that was not there before and was added roughly 3 caliphs after Muhammad. No political statements being made, just to let you know that when Jesus looked down from the Mount of Olives, he did not see that mosque. It was not there. That's to let you know that, looking down from the Mount of Olives, and that gives you a sort of feel. There you go. I'm moving the picture up so you can get a feel down. This is the looking down from the Mount of Olives, and so that just gives you a feel there for it. I'm going to go off of main plane, go back to split screen here, but I wanted to give you some sort of feel, if you've never been there, as to what that looks like. Okay? It's not perfect, but I remember seeing that in person. And shout out to Air Church that made it. And you missed our travelogue of Jerusalem if you just came in, but you did get a picture of looking down from the Mount of Olives. And so I wanted to give that to you. I talked about it, but I want to go back. That's a walk. Okay, I always wondered why, no gyms, no LA Fitness. Look, when I looked at the walks we used to take in Israel and realized that Jesus would have had to walk down from that and then back up from that, people got a lot of exercise just trying to get places. And Slam RN makes a great comment. And if I ever get little soundtracks like vocab, okay, because he's got the applause, I would like hit the applause button. Yeah, people who wrote this really did. And by the way, that tells me that these are not forgeries made later on. The claim that the Gospels were written much later, well, their description of the geography matches the time. Now, admittedly, it would have to a certain extent anyway. But the reality is this is real people describing what's around them. That's what I'm getting at. And so that's a walk, and D.A. Carson points that out for us and lets us know that we're dealing with real elevations here. So there's change in elevation. We're talking roughly, 3,000 feet. Phoenix is at 0. And if you go out of the valley here, some of the places are 4,000 feet. And so I know what it is to go from 0, and I get to do it in a car. But if you take the 17 up and you start getting out of the valley, you start getting some real elevations out here. Okay. Why in the world Jesus is going to chide them later on for not expecting him? Why? Why would they be expecting him? There was a messianic expectation at the time that was increasing, but should they be expecting him? Is that the correct thing for them to expect? And shout out to Air Church. Yes, hit that like and share button. If you're new, please subscribe. Please. Let's talk about prophecy. Oh, this is so cool. Okay. Admittedly, I have an eschatological bias, but I think the word supports that eschatological bias. I made things very generic, and I am not intending to insult brothers and sisters who view the end times a little differently than me. But I have a firm belief in the literalness of Daniel's 70 weeks of sevens. There is some discussion as how to understand parts of this. There are those of you that believe that everything has been fulfilled. There are a lot of reasons I don't agree with that. I understand their perspective. Let's deal with Daniel's 70 weeks of sevens, admitting a very literalist bias on my part, because I think that's the way the original audience would have taken it, and I go by the authorial intent and what would have been understood by the original audience. Remember, this is one of Jeff Cran's biggest refrigerator. I have a lot of refrigerator magnet sayings, but this is one that would probably go right near my tombstone on a plaque if I could. Okay? Prophecy may mean more, but it never means less, and it never means something different. So it can be more than the prophet understood, but it doesn't mean something different than the prophet understood, and it doesn't mean something less than the prophet understood. And that's just one of my go-tos of interpretation. We could call it a maxim that I use. So When we look at Daniel's 70 weeks of sevens, without giving you a complete tour of Daniel, as much as that would be fun, we know that it starts out with Daniel reading the book of Jeremiah. Now, if you want to go back to Daniel and read through the first part of the chapter tonight, or in the near future, I would encourage it. We find out that Daniel is doing his devotions in Jeremiah and figures out it's almost time for Israel to go back. That is the spur. Daniel wants to see Israel back in the land. So what does Daniel do? Well, Daniel spends verses after this praying and interceding on behalf of Israel because he does not want them to blow it and stay in captivity. When you get to Daniel verses 25 through 27 roughly, Daniel is given insight into the events that will happen. What he is given is a complete outline of prophecy. This is like amazing. Daniel's praying and interceding for Israel just so they can go back to the land and reestablish temple worship and worship the Lord their God. And what Daniel does is he gives them a complete end time scenario for what's going to happen with this nation. Now, admittedly, Jewish polemicists that don't believe in Jesus and don't like the gospel do not read this prophecy this way because they don't want to see this in it. We've had an apologetics. Go back through the recordings. There was an apologetic dealing with objections to Daniel's 70 weeks of sevens. But those objections, I don't think stand. Know therefore and understand from the time going forth of the command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. That's not just any Messiah. That's Messiah the Prince. That's the Messiah. Mashiach HaNagid. Okay, this is the guy. This is the man. There shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. Don't be fooled. That's weeks of years. We know that from the context that he's reading Jeremiah. Okay, and Jews were used to grouping in sevens. That's just to help you with the time. If you take 7 and 62, you get 69. Now, to know when this started, the street has to be rebuilt, the wall, even in troublesome times. After the 62, now look at the other underlined part. After the 62, which come after the 7, there are a series of events. And you can see it on the timeline. The timeline is an infographic that's available. I could not upload it early. It's just been very busy, okay? He shall confirm a covenant with many in the middle of the week. He shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. Understand there are two here. There's the Prince of the people who shall come and Messiah the Prince. Now, what I've done is summarize this, okay, as best I could. Messiah is cut off not for himself. And so we have in here the prophesying of the death of Messiah. Isn't that interesting? You wouldn't normally go to Daniel to prove the death of Messiah. I could prove it. Messiah HaNagid is cut off not for himself. Now, those are my two graphics. Was it to the day from, according to Daniel's prophecy, from the decree to rebuild Jerusalem until the coming of Messiah HaNagid, Messiah the Prince? Well, let's look at that. Now, here's our friend Matt. I love the ones where they're drinking a cup of coffee because I'm no good drinking coffee in the evening, but see, Matt has his cup of coffee in hand. He's a new virtual teaching assistant that I've created. I can't create people, but I can create graphics. So, some say that the 483 was completed at the triumphal entry of Jesus. Now, it's very hard to date the triumphal entry. A gentleman many, many years ago, and we're not talking the 1900s, okay, we're talking before that, wrote a great deal about this. This is Sir Robert Anderson. He wrote a book or material called The Coming of the King, And he follows the dates out very, very specifically, even making adjustments for leap years, the difference between the Roman and Hebrew calendars, the fact that there's no year zero. He does all of the math. Now, Dr. Whitcomb, in his book on Daniel, repeats some of Sir Robert Anderson's work. Dr. Whitcomb is gone to be with the Lord. I had the pleasure of sitting under his teaching. A wonderful man of God in every sense of the word, with a keen mind, a love of seeing people come to Jesus, an incredibly sharp wit, and just a wonderfully humble manner about him. And he is just wonderful. So if you take the 360-day year, which Israel used in Daniel's day. Now, the Hebrew calendar, as we know it now, was finished being codified, and the person credited with that is Hillel II. So the modern Hebrew calendar that we have now is very, very similar, and it's based on the work of the ancient calendar, but there are a few adjustments that Hillel added in order to make things work out. You calculate roughly 173,880. I believe it is, and I would recommend it. By the way, if you find it, Air Church, throw me the link, because I'd love a PDF copy of that, or to get a hold of that. That's something Logos could indeed offer. And if that was like coded, it would really be handy. If you take that 360 year and you do the math, you end up with roughly 173,880 days. Wow. From the decree to the triumphal entry, fulfilling the prophecy to this day. Volverd is pointing this out, but he's being quoted in an article in the Enduring Word, which I found on the net. There's the URL, by the way, if you're interested. It is available to you. You can copy it out. I may be able to throw it in the chat. Yes, I post links to the slides, and I cannot pull that right now because I am in view mode. But at the end, I can probably take this out of view mode and actually post the link to that article for you, because I'd love for you to have it. You just can't view it as a PowerPoint and do that simultaneously. So hang in there with me. I'll take this out of slideshow. I'll cut and paste that in the chat at the end, and you can go to Daniel chapter 9, the Enduring Word, Bible commentary that's on the web. And that can all be yours. Well, does that get us to the date? Well, that is the question. How do we know where to start and Jesus' death? Let's talk about this a little, because this would be like clockwork. And it would also explain why Jesus chided them for not knowing, because they had the potential to know the day of their visitation. The year AD 32 is based on Luke's chapter 3, verse 1 for Jesus' death is controversial. Yes, we have to admit other opinions. A lot of people favor 30 or 33 as opposed to 32. So that's just to kind of let you know that a recent article attempts to give credence to the date of 32. The article is by Reynold Showers, a brilliant guy who I've also had lunch with and had a lovely talk with. So I've hung out with some of these guys, and it's been fun. He wrote it in Grace Journal, which I'm very familiar with, number 9, Winter 1970, page 30. Evident is worthy of notice. So it's a good article. I cannot get you the link to Grace Journal. I do not believe it's being published anymore. It may be. It's out of Grace Theological Seminary, but things have changed a lot at Grace Theological Seminary. Okay. No one is able to declare Sir Robert Anderson's computations as impossible. In other words, people like to argue about it, but there's really good evidence for his computations. he certainly gets an A+ for all the mathematics he did. I love the Bible, but my dad was an accountant, and I don't love mathematics. And boy, does he go through it. Uh, some would like to say that the amount of time between Daniel's prophecy and the building of Jerusalem fits more appropriately with the exact date of the crucifixion. That's where they would like to go. This is a minority opinion, so this is not the consensus by any stretch. Um, Most find that date belonging to the triumphal entry, which happens 7 days before the crucifixion. Do understand that when you enter this passage here, you are a week before the Passion of Messiah. Okay? Um, if you take the Anderson calculations as reliable, and I think you have good reason to do that, I think you end up with something very incredible. Jesus chiding them because they had the information available to them. Now, admittedly, it was a lot of math, but what it shows here is that Jesus' triumphal entry that should have been anticipated. Little side note, shout out to Nate. Yes, there is the Patreon and the day of the broadcast. If you're not a on board supporting through Patreon, you can still kind of go there. I think. I also do it via Zion's Banner Facebook, so it's just an up there. So we have good reason to believe that Jesus walked at the exact day he was supposed to, down to predicted by Daniel. Now let's talk about how he got into town, because it wasn't certainly by a taxi, and there's some reasons for this that we're going to go through. So hang out with me. If you lose me or, got to go grab a sandwich or coffee, come back. Probably not coffee this time of night. That hot cocoa you've been dying to have all day. The instructions for Jesus' transport are given to the disciples. Say to them, go into the village opposite you, immediately you will find a donkey tied and a colt with her. Loose them and bring them to me. If anyone says anything to you, you shall say, the Lord has need of them, and immediately he will send them. Okay? The word Lord there does not have to be a title of deity. It could be. Now, when it's used with Lord have mercy on us, Son of David, I think you have a really good argument. I don't think it doesn't mean that here, but I wouldn't want to stake my case for the Trinity on this verse. If you already know what you know from the Bible about the deity of Messiah, it would be natural for you to take that verse this way. Would the original audience have taken this verse this way? Well, the disciples, I think there's good cause to believe they did. I'm not going to make my entire case for the deity of Messiah on this particular verse alone. Okay? So don't get mad. It's just I'm saying I wouldn't want to put all my eggs in one basket and this be the basket. I think you have good reason to believe so. But I know those that would like to take issue with that, and I would say to them that I don't need that verse to prove it. So that's just fine. Oh, there we go again. Our friend is back, Michael. Why a colt? Why a donkey? Now understand, this is fulfillment of prophecy and the expectation of the people. This was actually expected. Now, Sanhedrin is Talmud, but it existed, these portions existed during the time. Sanhedrin is the record of the Jewish Supreme Court, pretty much, to a large extent. And you find this phrase connecting back to Zechariah 9:9, referring to the fact that Messiah would ride upon, you have the donkey there. And so you have that connection there. Jesus is actually fulfilling prophecy as it was understood by the people at the time. Sorry about the old English there, but it just is the way it is. So, now D.A. Carson makes an interesting comment that I just couldn't pass up. In the midst of the excited crowd, an unbroken animal remains calm under the hands of Messiah. Now, understand horses, donkeys, and as such will spook. This is a large, loud crowd. There's every reason to believe the animal would spook. And so he's pointing out the contrast here between a very loud, excited audience, an unbroken animal, means it hadn't been ridden before, and the calmness this animal is showing as it's under the control of Messiah who controls nature. I think that's a kind of neat picture. The event points to the peace of the consummated kingdom. I love that comment right there. That's like worth the price of admission. We see that Jesus will bring or lift the curse on creation in Isaiah 11, 1 through 10. And so this is this beautiful picture because when the kingdom comes in Isaiah 11, the lion will lie down with the lamb, and the cobra will do no harm. And you have, no harm will be done on my holy mountain. And you have the kingdom, and you have this change and transformation in even the animal world. And here you have this little microcosm picture of it. He is really stressing fulfillment of prophecy, but yet the picture itself points to something. Isn't that kind of neat? Like you hear a line from a movie and you remember the entire movie. Well, this is fulfilled prophecy, but it points to other future prophecy that'll be fulfilled when the kingdom's consummated. And I thought, yay, D.A. Carson, that's a really neat thing to note. And so I'm going to throw that up there. And again, I'm quoting from his own article in the Expositor's Bible Commentary. And you have all the information there. It is available in Logos. It's an excellent commentary series. So what happened? Did the disciples fail? Did they do good? Well, the disciples went and they did as Jesus commanded. There was no problem because Jesus commanded it. It was going to work out. They brought the donkey and the colt. They laid their clothes on them and set him on them. And a great multitude spread their clothing on the ground and cut down branches from trees and spread them on the road. Now, every Palm Sunday, churches reproduce this, and it's real easy for us here in Phoenix because we have palm trees. And the multitudes who went before him followed and cried out, Hosanna to the Son of David. Blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord. Now that latter part, blessed be he who comes in the name of the Lord, Baruch haba Hashem Adonai, is straight out of the Psalms, the Hallel Psalms. And so they're quoting scripture related to Messiah, who is the blessed one who will bring the kingdom, the Son in whom he's well pleased. And they're literally quoting scripture and applying it to Messiah. Now, these Psalms are read at the end of a Passover Seder, which speaks of redemption. Now, that's not a biblical thing. It's a neat twist of providence that God has kept alive in the Jewish people, and so that's kind of nice. Let me tell you a funny story about Hosanna. It'll help you remember the word. What did I say, Hosanna? That's because of the way it's pronounced in the Hebrew. It's not pronounced Hosanna, it's pronounced Hosanna. It means, Lord, please save. So when you see Hosanna, understand what it translates to, because it's transliterated. It was used in terms of help, particularly asking for divine help. So it's not just a simple greeting. Jews didn't run up to each other and say, Hosanna Eliezer, and Eliezer would say, Hosanna Micah, back. That's not the way it worked. And so it itself points to something. It was used in a more generic way, help. Interestingly enough, when Israel became a state, they needed a Hebrew word for help. The joke is told that they would use left Hosanna there, and some guy was drowning, and as he was coming up, he was yelling Hosanna, and they thought he was having a religious experience. And so now there is a modern Hebrew word for help. That's a little tidbit from my tour director when I went to Israel about 12 years ago. He has since passed away, too. What's the initial response? Everything's beautiful, right? A great crowd. By the way, it doesn't necessarily tell you the size of the crowd, and that's what's being pointed out by D.A. Carson. It's elative. It indicates the excitement more than anything else. They spread their cloaks on the ground. Why did they do that? Because it was acknowledging Jesus's kingship. How do we know that? Because there are similar incidents. There's a similar incident like this in 2 Kings 9:13, where Jehu, who is no Messiah, uh, and he is being, kind of entering as king. Each man hastened to take his garment, put them under him at the top of the stairs, and they blew their trumpets, saying, Jehu is king, Second Chronicles. And so this is a similar incident that shows that they were acknowledging verbally. Now, there's a problem with this that we'll talk about at the end of this. They were acknowledging these verbally and initially Jesus's kingship. Now, somebody said, oh, palm branches. Those are connected with the Feast of Tabernacles. This must have happened during the Feast of Tabernacles because they're taking palm branches. Aha, this is obvious to us. And some people have argued this, and D.A. Carson brings up this argument. There are some problems with this argument. First of all, Jesus' Passion Week is connected to Passover. So the best chronologies put the triumphal entry a week before Passover because that would be a week before the Passion. There's little evidence to suggest months and months of time here. This is the end of Jesus' earthly ministry that we're coming to, and it's a week between the two, and that's what the best chronologies equal. And so you'd have a week before Passover, which doesn't put you anywhere near the fall feasts. But beyond that, just because there are branches there and they're palm branches doesn't mean it has to be Sukkot. Well, how do I know that? Well, because we have similar incidents that do not have anything to do with Sukkot, where someone is honored in this way. Let me give you one. D.A. Carson points out that in Maccabees, Simon Maccabeus receives a greeting like this, but it's not dependent on the time of year. It's not connected with the Feast of Tabernacles, but with Simon Maccabeus. This is, the end of the Maccabean revolt and the Jews being able to worship God again, and right before the holiday known as Hanukkah, which is coming up. Where is this incident contained? Well, fortunately, with Logos Bible software, I have these books in my library. So where there's a connection, I just click on the link and it comes up. This is the Apocrypha of the Old Testament, English translation or edition by Robert Henry Charles, and he records the incident in 1 Maccabees 13:51 through 52. Now, he's not recording, he's actually making it available to us. So let me clarify that, but I'm not going to read it in its original. He entered into it on the 3rd and 20th day, wow, which would be the 23rd day of the second month, which would not be Sukkot, in 171st year, with praise and palm branches, see, and hymns and songs, because a great enemy had been destroyed out of Israel. And it was ordained that that day should be kept every year with gladness. So we have this account here that is not dependent on Sukkot, in which honor is given through the spreading of palm branches like this. So it doesn't have to be Sukkot. That argument really doesn't work. And I'm just letting you know it doesn't work. It's a logical argument for someone to jump to, but it isn't the place to go. Thank you. Air Church sent me a link to Anderson's book on Twitter. Actually, you can do links in the chat, but I'll do that later with. I promised a resource, so I'll do that later with that resource. Oh, the article on Daniel 9. So let's see if we understand what happens here. Now, it's a week before the crucifixion. Jesus comes into town. He's presented before the nation. The crowd is excited. They're happy. But exactly a week later, as we go through the rest of this text, you're going to see that Jesus is actually turned over by the people. How do we understand such a change? How do we comprehend such an alteration in the crowd? What can we learn from this? We can learn an emotional response to truth, or emotional responses to truth aren't enough. See, they had an emotional response that the king who was going to liberate them from Rome had appeared, and that's what they were expecting. But see, that initial emotional response that is not followed up by anything is not going to carry you through. Emotions are wonderful things, but they don't have the power to carry us through. And so this initial emotional wave of response, if it, does not have root in it, okay, it does not have enough root to be sustained in the people, okay. When we respond to God, God wants a response from the full person, which means body. Um, and when I say the complete spirit, I'm not talking about the spiritual dynamic. I'm talking about the facets of us as mere human beings. We have mind, we think. We have will, we choose, and we have emotion, we feel. And God wants us all in. And if we just respond with our emotions, but not with our will and our mind, then that's an incomplete response to truth. And it's not going to be enough. If we respond with our mind and not with our emotions, that's going to be slightly incomplete too. And we need to respond with our will always. And so I'm not trying to divide human beings up or talk about our nature, but I'm saying we need to be all in. If the people were firmly committed to Jesus' messiahship, repenting before him as necessary, and truly being all into what he taught and what he demanded, they would have been ready, but they were not ready. And so they respond with this shallow emotional response, which is just not enough to carry them through what they need to be carried through. And so it's not going to be enough. It's going to fail. It's going to fall short. And that which is love can easily become hate. In fact, it's a small step between the two. One said that hate is love that has been twisted. That really, if you hate something, it's because you had a love that did not go or work the right way. In other words, it's a parasite off of. Anyway, that's enough philosophizing. Um, Even though the degree is connected to philosophy, we don't need to do a lot of that. Let me get you that link. That's why I'm doing this right now, so I can throw it in to the article. And I'm going up to the article to get it. There it is. And I'm going to pull that and put it in. And if the link works, we'll be doing good. I'm not sure if it will work. I'm not sure it'll copy even. Let's do a Control C. Let's do a Control V. I'm going to try this. There it is. There's the link. And so if you want the article, it should be right there for you. You just click on that link and it will take you to the article on Daniel 9 that we discussed tonight. And so you have another resource there. And so there you go. I'm going to look through any questions, comments, although you are still perfectly free to make them. And see what we're at. Okay. And okay. I want to thank. I have not seen Slam RN before, so I am really grateful you joined us. Nice picture of Lucy there. And so thanks for joining us. I hope to see you many more times, regularly. But if not regularly, many, many more times. So that is absolutely great. There you go. Nate has it as a clickable link. So I don't know, maybe mine wasn't clickable, but thank you, Nate, for doing your magic. Thank you, Jack, for being here. I really appreciate it. I am thrilled tonight worked better. I really am. So that is absolutely great. And Nate threw up the Patreon. And again, some people support us through chosen people. Huh. Nate, you are so good. I started listening to Nate's Rogue One. I didn't get to hear Nate saying a lot because I was just into the beginning. But he has a wonderful channel. Thanks, Steve. You are such a support. I love being able to, going to be in the future, being able to sign my name that way. So, oh, quick note. Nate says he's reviewed Prince of Egypt. I would be interested in that review. I don't know if you know it, Nate, but there's actually Hebrew scripture that's part of the prayer book, the Song of Moses. And they did a wonderful job with it. They weaved it into a song beautifully and kept the Hebrew and kept the melody very nicely close. So that's just a quick. As I said good night, but Nate threw the comment up, and I had to comment on that. So, blessings and good night. The stream will stop. There's still a few more minutes for comment. It's been great having you all here. Have a restful night.